Hello, everyone. Welcome to 100M Daily Podcast.
The global spotlight has been intense, almost, overwhelmingly so, on the escalating conflict in the Middle East.
Yeah.
We're talking Israel, Iran, and now the direct involvement of the United States. For many of us, it's a situation that feels not just complex, but frankly, full of contradictory narratives and incredibly high stakes.
It truly is. A striking detail here is just how rapidly the landscape shifts, often in real time.
Right.
Our mission for you today is really to try and cut through all that noise, to truly understand the crucial details, the motivations behind these recent actions, and the immediate aftermath.
Yeah, the aftermath of the U.S. military strikes on Iran and then Iran's retaliation against Israel that followed.
Exactly.
This certainly feels like a red line moment in international diplomacy, doesn't it?
It really does, yeah.
We've pulled together a diverse stack of sources for this deep dive. I mean, everything from official White House statements to on-the-ground reports from Tehran and Gaza and expert analysis that helps us piece together what's really happening.
So what does this all mean for you? Trying to make sense of it all. Let's unpack this.
Okay, so the fuse for this latest escalation seems to have been lit by a direct order from President Donald Trump. Our sources detail that he commanded stealth bombers.
The stealth bombers, yeah.
To strike at what he called the heart of Iran's nuclear program overnight. And he explicitly targeted 3 key nuclear sites, Fordo, Natanz, and Esfahan plants.
And his stated rationale was, crystal clear, prevent any nuclear threat from Iran.
Right.
Trump claimed these key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. That was the language.
Totally obliterated. Strong words.
Very strong. And we even saw those images released by the White House, showing him, his VP, top advisors in the Situation Room, watching it all unfold.
That immediate public declaration of complete success.
Yeah.
It becomes a bit of a point of contention later, as we'll get into.
Oh, absolutely.
And the sheer destructive power involved. B-2 bombers reportedly using massive 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs on Fordo.
Designed to go deep underground, yeah. Something like 80 meters.
And Tomahawk missiles apparently used for Natanz and Esfahan. So this wasn't just a tap on the shoulder.
No, not at all. It was a clear signal of deep strike capability. And remember, this followed Trump's prior push for Iran to make a deal, to give up nuclear enrichment.
That 60-day deadline that had passed with no agreement.
Exactly. That deadline was key context here.
It's important to note the specific language the U.S. used, too. Trump declared, Israel's fight is also America's fight.
We worked as a team like perhaps no team has ever worked before. Something like that.
And we've gone a long way to erasing this horrible threat to Israel.
Yeah. But, and this is a critical piece of information from our sources, the U.S. reportedly reached out to Iran beforehand.
Really? What did they say?
Well, the communication apparently indicated the strikes were limited, that regime change wasn't the actual goal.
Interesting. So sort of managing expectations.
Kind of. The White House's hope, at least stated hope, was for Iran to return to negotiations. But they coupled that with a pretty stark warning.
Which was?
Essentially, peace or tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days, if there was any retaliation.
Wow. Okay. Well, Iran's immediate response certainly didn't sound like a return to the negotiating table.
Not exactly, no.
Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araki, was quick to accuse the U.S. of betraying international diplomacy by attacking their nuclear sites.
And he emphasized, really stressed, that these attacks happened in the middle of talks and negotiation with Europeans in Geneva just 2 days prior.
So the timing was particularly galling from their perspective.
Extremely. He was very clear, asserting it was not Iran but the U.S. who betrayed diplomacy by, as he put it, giving a green light to Israelis right in the middle of these sensitive negotiations.
That sequence of events, it doesn't just raise questions about future trust, does it? It sort of fundamentally changes the game.
It really does. It redefines diplomatic engagement there, and Iran is now openly stating its trust in the U.S. is, quote, non-existent.
And Araki also took aim at the IAEA, the UN's nuclear watchdog.
Yeah, he criticized them, accusing them of not being clear enough with the U.S. about Iran's peaceful nuclear project, which he insists was not aiming for a weapon.
And as a direct consequence, Iran demanded that emergency UN Security Council meeting.
Right. Their UN ambassador sent a formal letter. Araki explicitly accused the U.S. of having violated the United Nations Charter, a very serious charge.
Now, what about the actual retaliation? There was a lot of ambiguity there initially. Right?
Yeah, that's a particularly striking detail. While they definitely said they will respond, the exact nature, well, that was left unclear, pending a decision from their Supreme National Security Council.
But the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, they weren't quite so ambiguous.
No, they issued a strong statement, didn't they, declaring Washington has now placed itself on the front line of aggression.
And they didn't stop there. They asserted that the locations U.S. aircraft took off from have been identified and are under surveillance.
Right, and they highlighted U.S. military bases in the region as a major vulnerability.
And said attacks on Israel, their Operation True Promise, will continue with a precise, targeted, and severe manner. They even mentioned considering responses that go beyond the delusional calculations, whatever that means.
Strong rhetoric, certainly. But what's also interesting is what wasn't immediately mentioned by officials.
Like what?
Well, like exiting the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, or closing the Strait of Hormuz. Iraqi criticized the NPT situation, sure, but no immediate threat to leave it.
So maybe some careful calibration even amidst the tough talk, suggesting they want to control escalation.
It could suggest that, yes. Trying to signal resolve without necessarily triggering an all-out conflict immediately.
Okay, so while Iran was calibrating its response, how was the news received in Israel? The U.S. strikes, I mean.
Well, our sources tell us the news was met with, let's just say, a lot of celebration.
A big win for Netanyahu.
Exactly. Seen as a big win for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu after literally decades of lobbying for direct U.S. involvement against Iran's nuclear program.
You even had some Israeli ministers calling Trump a messenger of God.
Yes. And billboards thanking him popped up in Tel Aviv. Even opposition leaders welcomed the U.S. action.
So remarkable unity within Israel on this specific U.S. intervention.
It really underscored the long-standing Israeli concern, yeah.
But that celebration, it was pretty quickly followed by direct Iranian retaliation, which must have shifted the mood.
Dramatically. Sources indicate 2 successive volleys, maybe around 27 missiles total, hitting Israeli cities like Haifa and the larger Tel Aviv area, Rishon LeZion, Bat Yam mentioned specifically.
And the impact?
Significant. Extensive damage to buildings reported, 26 Israelis injured, 1 moderately, according to initial reports.
And there was something about an investigation in Haifa.
Yeah, the Israeli army is looking into a missile impact there that happened before the sirens went off. So possibly an interception missile failure, or it just hit too fast.
And as a result, more restrictions on daily life in Israel, anticipating more retaliation.
That's right. It shows the tangible impact, the fear settling in.
Okay, now let's get back to the damage from those initial U.S. strikes, because this is where we see those wildly conflicting reports you mentioned.
Right. This really brings the intelligence concerns right to the forefront. You had Trump declaring complete and spectacular success, totally obliterated facilities almost immediately after the strikes.
Almost too immediately.
Well, that's the question. Because Iran claims its facilities were not completely destroyed, they stated enriched uranium stockpile and technology were transferred from Fordo beforehand.
And there was satellite imagery showing trucks.
Reportedly, yeah. Satellite imagery showing maybe 20 trucks moving assets away from Fordo.
Which leads to this other report.
Exactly. The report that the U.S. had already told Iran in advance that it's going to hit here and there in the timing, basically giving them time to move assets.
If true, that directly contradicts Trump's claim of complete and spectacular success.
It absolutely does. And one military expert pointed out, you simply couldn't make that kind of damage assessment totally obliterated so quickly after the strikes.
So the actual effectiveness, much more nuanced, potentially much less than initially proclaimed.
Very possibly, yeah.
And the intelligence concerns, they don't stop there, do they? There's this issue with Congress.
Right. Congressional Democrats raising what they called the biggest concerns about the intelligence leading up to the strikes.
Referencing that statement from the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard.
Her March 26 statement to Congress, where she initially stated there was no evidence that Iran was working towards a nuclear bomb since 2013.
But then Trump publicly rebuked her.
Yes, a public rebuke. And subsequently, she reissued the statement, but crucially, it was missing that key assessment about Iran not actively working on a bomb.
Which has obviously caused worry.
Significant worry among some Americans about being, dragged into a Middle East war on the basis of faulty intelligence.
Drawing those uneasy parallels to past conflicts, Iraq, for instance.
Exactly. Those parallels are hard to ignore.
Okay, so beyond the battlefield, the ripple effects immediately hit the diplomatic sphere. How did the world respond? Let's start with the institutions like the UN.
Well, as we mentioned, Iran wasted no time calling for that UN Security Council emergency meeting.
Right.
And the head of the IAEA, the nuclear watchdog, also called for an emergency board meeting. This really brought a spotlight on the agency's role and its ability to function amidst these kinds of tensions.
And Iran was accusing the IAEA of not protecting its program.
Yeah, accusing them of failing to protect its peaceful program, which was under IAEA inspection, and arguing the attack itself violated international law.
So what about the broader global reaction? Diverse, I imagine.
Very diverse, reflecting all the complex allegiances and interests. You have Saudi Arabia expressing great concern, calling for more diplomacy, understandable given their proximity.
Okay.
Supported the U.S. action, reiterated Iran must never develop a nuclear weapon, but also urged a return to negotiations, kind of backing the U.S. but wanting de-escalation.
Okay. And others, Qatar. On.
Qatar deplored the deterioration, warned of catastrophic repercussions, urged dialogue. Oman, which has acted as a mediator before.
Right, they have channels.
They do. They called the U.S. strikes a serious violation of international law and the UN Charter, condemning the escalation quite strongly.
And what about Russia and China? Always key players.
Well, they expressed condemnation, but haven't really indicated they'll directly confront the U.S. over this, which raises that intriguing question, might they perhaps quietly see U.S. entanglement in the Middle East as a useful distraction?
A distraction that benefits their own strategic aims globally by tying up U.S. attention and resources.
It's certainly a possibility analysts are considering.
Stepping back from the immediate events then, there's this fascinating layer of analysis emerging. The idea that Trump might have been played or manipulated by the Israelis.
Yeah, the suggestion that the Israelis indicated they'd attack Iran regardless, essentially forcing Trump's hand or securing U.S. support for an action they intended anyway.
Which adds this crucial political dimension, doesn't it? And highlights the gamble for Trump domestically.
Absolutely. He's constantly balancing different factions. You have the hard-right Republicans who favor war with Iran.
And then the sort of Trumpist figures like Tucker Carlson or Steve Bannon, who argue U.S. military focus should be squarely on China, not the Middle East.
Exactly. Plus, he navigates avoiding a formal congressional declaration of war by citing an imminent threat.
A tactic we've definitely seen before to authorize military action without full legislative backing. Okay, so what about Iran's options now? That second part of the answer is still pending, waiting for their Supreme National Security Council.
It is, but the possibilities being discussed are significant, and they really could reshape the whole diplomatic landscape.
Like potentially withdrawing from the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT.
That's considered a very strong option on the table for them. It would change drastically any future talks, especially if they feel the NPT offers zero protection for even their peaceful program.
More attacks.
Continued attacks on Israel are possible, or perhaps targeting American bases or assets in the region.
But there's this critical insight too, right? That while the U.S. strikes might diminish Iran's capabilities,
they might actually increase Iran's motivation to develop nuclear weapons.
Because of the perceived betrayal, the violation of talk.
Precisely. The feeling that diplomacy failed them, that promises were broken. So why not pursue the ultimate deterrent if negotiations offer no security?
So Iran, according to one analyst, is now readying itself for a prolonged war of attrition.
Yeah, and that its responses are calculated to be proportionate, suggesting maybe it doesn't want a full-scale escalation, but feels absolutely compelled to respond to attacks.
Which brings us back to that trust issue.
Completely. Their view seems to be that trust in the U.S. is now, non-existent.
And while these huge geopolitical chess moves between Washington, Tehran, Jerusalem, while they rightly grab global attention, it feels crucial we also turn the spotlight somewhere else. To the devastating and often just overshadowed crisis in Gaza. Because for many people living through this wider conflict isn't separate at all.
No, it's the very crucible, isn't it? The source from which so many of these wider tensions emerge. And our sources highlight the immediate, horrific aftermath of recent Israeli attacks there.
What are we hearing?
Tragically, reports of at least 6 people killed recently, including a married couple, displaced people just living in tents, many critically injured near aid distribution sites, and this happened amidst a 5-hour internet blackout, making things even harder.
And the general humanitarian situation remains dire.
Dire is an understatement. Critical aid just isn't getting in consistently. Humanitarian organizations are shutting down operations because it's too dangerous or impossible. Hospitals are dangerously overcrowded, struggling desperately to cope.
The daily struggles.
Yeah.
Just basic survival must be immense.
Absolutely. A severe lack of clean water, often what they get is contaminated, poor sanitation everywhere, a complete lack of basic hygiene items.
Which leads to disease.
Widespread increase in infectious diseases, yeah. Particularly skin diseases are rampant. It's just a compounding humanitarian catastrophe.
And this is layered on top of the long-term suffering, isn't it? People living in tents for, what is it now, over 20 months?
Over 20 months. Enduring extreme weather, unsanitary conditions. It just deepens the trauma day after day.
So for many, this entire larger Israel-Iran-U.S. conflict, it's seen almost as a smokescreen.
Exactly. A smokescreen for the continuing horrific suffering in Gaza, a constant underlying tragedy that rarely gets the same sustained global attention as these missile strikes.
As we've seen throughout this deep dive, the immediate actions, the strikes, the retaliation, they're clear enough. But the long-term consequences are anything but.
Yeah, completely opaque in many ways.
We've uncovered these conflicting narratives, these huge strategic gambles, and honestly, a perilous path forward. It really leaves us with a profound question, doesn't it?
It does. In an era where victory gets declared sometimes before the smoke even clears, before the damage is fully assessed, and where one side's peacekeeping is another's betrayal of diplomacy, how do nations even begin to rebuild trust?
Or maybe, more critically, how do we protect the most vulnerable people caught in the crossfire when the global spotlight inevitably moves on to the next headline?